Most people don't think of strategy that way.
Developing a new strategy.
Strategic blind spots.
When strategy meets reality.
Strategy and innovations.
In the strategy world.
Drive their strategic goals.
And welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. And welcome back to the Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm delighted to have Stefan Norrvall to join us all the way from Australia today. Great to have you on the show, Stefan. I've been looking forward to you appearing for quite some time.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Cool. Just for our listeners, do you mind giving a bit of background and a bit of context of what you've been up to lately?
Lately has been a lot of work on trying to come up with a different way of thinking about organizational design. Having been in this space for many, many years, I wrote an article in, I think it was November last year, that got a lot of traction, which spoke about complexity and that the different types of complexity in an organization won't go away just because you have fewer managers or agile teams and that kind of stuff. And so from that, myself and Richard Clayton have developed a new model for looking at organizational coherence, which by all accounts is very well connected into the work of strategy, if we're looking at those two as two things that have to go together. So that's been a lot of my focus in the last couple of months, and I'm also applying that right now in a large-scale org design project here in Paris.
Nice. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to get you on for. We briefly met a long time ago, but that article sort of reignited us, and I'll put your Substack in the link for this episode to urge people to read the article because it's really good. And you bring up a really good point about coherence. And often people say to me, Mike, what's the difference between alignment and coherence? And there's a lot of people get upset with me because I say I talk about coherence, not alignment. But I think there's a real important distinction, and you draw that out really clearly in your article.
Yeah. I'm glad it resonated. And I think the alignment to me seems to have a bit of linear causation behind it. And I think coherence is a better, more systemic lens, I think, on how we think about this. Organizations, I think you and I would agree that they're not machines. They're not, the cause and effect aren't always linear. So we need different language and different models for thinking about it.
Yeah, because I got... there was a book by Jonathan Trevor talks about alignment, and I challenged him on that very much point. It's with alignment, you've got that risk always of centralizing something and thinking that every part of the organization has to be the same, and often they aren't because they've got different tasks, different parts of the external environment, different elements and complexity they're trying to deal with. So yeah, coherence, I think that bit that enables your parts of your organization to be self-organizing, adapting, but without fracturing the whole, I think is really important.
Yeah, the first article that I wrote really sort of tried to grapple with the idea of work, like the concept of work, because it's a term that's used so often, and it's almost like seen as one homogeneous thing, work, when I think we try to talk about, try to make it easy and not get too stuck into the theory that sits behind it. But we use a simple heuristic of run, serve, change. If we think about three core buckets of work, that's all important and all needs to happen in an organization, just to get a bit more of a grapple of like, what is this part of the organization dealing with? What's the type of complexity that it needs to grapple with? Is it operational complexity? Is it coordination or integration or environmental complexity? And we think about this as a recursive model, which means run, serve, change happens at every layer, but where the emphasis sits is different. So if you're close to the value creation side of things, the core focus should be in operations, with less in sort of the serve, which is the coordination integration stuff. And when I talk about change from an environment point of view, it's with that local environment that operations is serving. And when we then go up to the recursion, higher up recursion levels, then change is about the enterprise as a whole. And to your point before, they operate at different tempos as well, which is an important factor to consider in this.
Yeah, I think that fractal level always gets confused. And I think it's getting even more confused at the moment because you've got, I'm trying to think of a kind way of putting them, but these people that talk around this new base thing of completely flat organizations. The new one I've heard recently is polymorphous or something organization.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just this thing that they just expect that an organization, being it, at least they get the fact that organizations aren't a machine anymore, but they think that it's just going to sort of self-evolve and emerge to something without any sort of constraints put in place. Really, I think it's a bit hand wavery to my point.
Yeah, and I think that's a key concept, the constraint side of things, because I think that is the work of the change, what we call change at the sort of the enterprise level, is really around setting the higher level constraints of the business in terms of the, what are the markets that we operate in, who are the customers we're targeting, what's our risk appetite, and those type of things, and really sensing the much broader environment and trying to then either shape or be shaped by that, and how that's evolving, which is right in the strategy space. But when it then goes back into the organization, it's about how does the serve layer take some of those constraints and make them real, so to speak, in terms of how do we almost codify them in terms of systems or platforms or whatever we might have that would then enable the run side of the business to just focus on run. So the boundaries are clear. This is how we need to operate. And they could just get on with that work without having to also then carry the integration and coordination load at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I've just been guilty of something that I always do because I get so excited because I want to jump in and talk about this stuff. Just for clarity for our listeners, do you wouldn't mind just giving a quick little thing around what how you defining run, serve, change in an organization? Yeah.
So run is whatever the organization does. Like it's basically its core purpose. So if it's if it's a bakery, it'll be baking the goods and selling them. The frontline type stuff. And serve is about you only really need a serve layer if you have multiple runs. So if you have multiple operating units, because that's where the coordination and integration comes into place, because you don't want the various operating units to cannibalize on each other or to compete for resources in a way that then obviously negatively impacts the operation of the business. So the serve layer is there to sort of, and we spoke about coherence before, so it's about making the operating units coherent with what the intent is from the whole of the business, which might be branding, its identity, making sure that the same cybersecurity approaches are implemented across the business, customer data management, if it's a big organization that got those type of things that it has to deal with, all of those type of things. And it's about sort of providing that almost as a service so that when we design the work in those things are just taken into account, but they're managed by someone else in the business.
Yes.
And then change is the layer above, which is usually what we would probably call like the executive layer, if you want, but it's really about longer time horizons, and it's about thinking about how are we fitting in with the external environment in terms of what are the signals from the external environment that we need to either respond to, because there are things in the market, customer sentiment has shifted and what we're selling is no longer appropriate, or we need to evolve the product mix that we have or the markets that we operate in, those type of decisions that are much longer term. And also then the identity of the organization itself, like how does that, like who do we want to be in the market and with what we're doing, and how does that then translate via serve into the way that we design work in our operating run units. And we we run a really simple sort of tests, like with executive teams, once we've introduced the basic heuristic of run, serve, change, and then just ask them to think about where is your time spent? Do you spend more time in run actions or serve actions or change actions? And more often than not, they spend way too much time doing or responding to, operational. We call it structural load because we don't want to get caught in the whole complexity science sort of debate. So we talk about structural load instead of complexity, but that's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with operational load instead of focusing more on the change. So they have the allocation of their time is usually a bit skewed compared to what we would suggest that it should be.
Yeah, you really highlight that key problem because when I deal with clients and we're talking about strategy, there's normally really two big elements that are happening. One is that they are dealing with, as you call it, the run of the organisation because they haven't got that serve element in. There's no coordination. So they are getting pulled into all the conflict, all the arguments about whose decisions, who, and etc., which then completely takes all their time. So they have no spare capacity to meaningfully then look to the external environment to go, well, what's changing and what do we need to start adapting or changing so that we maintain that fit in the external environment. I see that quite often. It always surprises me, and I think I commented on one of your posts this weekend or something. I can't remember now. My days just disappear. But as it's really does surprise me when I review org changes or I review a current organization, how very little that what you call that serve layer is even considered.
We're running some work now, large org structure change, thousands and thousands of role descriptions and functional accountabilities have been drawn and value streams and RACI charts and you name it, every operating model artifact under the sun. And we still find that there is a tremendous amount of confusion when it comes to who makes the decision on this, especially at like boundary interfaces where more than one division or part of the business have to come together for something and they just don't know. And this is the idea that, the concept that I call the confusion tax is just like that hidden cost that an organization pays because it can't provide the clarity of how it's supposed to work. And that cost is, there's a financial cost to it because of decision latency, because of how long it takes to get decisions done. And then it's the human cost, which, not to be underestimated in terms of all of the pressures that it's putting on people in sort of unauthorized or unscoped out roles that have to carry this structural load because it's not designed anywhere. But people carry it anyway because they're there, they want to do a good job and they can see that it needs to get done, but it's not officially designed, to your point, but someone still carries it. And it then comes at a quite a high cost. So it's an expensive way to run the business. And there is a couple of simple things that you can do to try and highlight it. And the way we're doing it right now is to get a whole range of different people in a room and run them through a couple of really pointed scenarios. So this is an infrastructure organization. So a lot of heavy assets or, big assets that they build and run. So asset handover, when you have, in this case, they've got a functional design. So there's a delivery function and then there's an operate and maintain function. And we go, well, when there's a conflict between an asset being handed over from delivery to the operator maintainer, and things have changed. Like these things could take years to build. So it could take like 3, 4, 5 years to build the asset. And then things have shifted, the standards have shifted or the regulatory landscape has shifted. So the way that it was when you started, when you wrote the business case or you got the money to build the asset, the environment has shifted. And now there's a conflict about, well, this doesn't meet standards anymore. And then you go, well, okay, so when you have this conflict, which happens all the time, who makes what calls? And they can't answer it because then all that happens is it gets escalated, and God knows how many different forums have to be involved, but they just cannot clearly say up to this level, it's this person who makes the decision, or this role has got the authority
Yeah.
to make this decision on, whatever the different thresholds are, risk, delays, costs and benefit, the impact on all these different things. So it just forces out. So there's a simple exercise you can do in terms of like getting people to really think about some of these really key boundary interface and have a really crisp scenario, and then test out how much clarity you have. And then you should be able to point to an operating model artifact that explains it. And more often than not, you can't, because you have a RACI chart that's got, one or two roles that are accountable, three roles that are responsible. And then you go, well, what about when they disagree? What happens then?
Yeah.
So it's a huge cost to any organization, which is also why strategy so often doesn't work, because we haven't done that loop around decision making to actually enable the strategy to get legs.
No, they don't know where to point it to. And this is the thing that confuses me a lot in organizations, is because we're talking quite a thoughtful way to design an organization so that it can actually do what it's meant to do. When you go into some organization that hasn't been thought through that way, it's been designed because I've got so many execs and they need so many direct reports, or we've now got this extra team because Dave wasn't capable of doing the job. So instead of investigating to understand what it is, we've just split it apart. Now we've created a boundary which is going to increase conflict and complexity. And then so when we're trying to make a strategic decision and we're going to give direction, we don't know who to give that direction to, or who's actually responsible to enact that decision. And that's where it just turns into chaos. And then our only way to try and square that away is to create another PMO to just manage things. And we start then delivering it like a program management style approach, which is just not going to work.
No, and also then with the PMO, are you actually giving the PMO like what I would call like the requisite authorities to actually do what they would need to do to be successful in their role? What are the outcomes that PMO are actually accountable for? A lot of PMOs that I've seen, all that they're accountable for is providing, like ratings on where projects or programs are up to. They don't have the authority to reallocate resources from a portfolio perspective because, one's delayed or there's a scarce resource somewhere that's better applied over at this program over here because it's the priorities have shifted and actually it's more valuable over here and we can accept a bit of delay over there. They don't have any authority to do any of that. No. So all they can do is report. And that's it.
Yeah.
And you go, well, okay.
And it's the same with
what's the real value of that?
Yeah, yeah. And it's the same with change teams. You get Matt seeing change teams that are technically accountable for the success of the change, but they've got no decision right or authority to do anything with the change. They just got to hope that they can get someone on board within that function or team that they're trying to enact the change on to help lead it.
Yep. And I'd say all of that, that's like poor design.
Yeah. Hugely. and I often talk about that they're in an organization, there's a strategy being enacted. It just may not be the one that's stated. And
probably more often the case. More often the case than not, I would say.
Yeah. And I could go on a massive rant for like why that is. There's the part we can agree that sometimes the strategy that they do is just aspirational nonsense, not actually anything strategy. But the other part is that because we've got that, like I love the term confusion tax, because there's confusion about who should be doing what and where and what it means, is that and you said it earlier about being shaped or shaping. So the organization is going to react to pressures, be it from the external environment, be regulatory changes, be it other actors, the competition. They're going to react to those, and they will do, especially if you've got no constraints in place, no guidance, no direction that's clear, other than we're going to be the best in the world at something, as well. Most strategies, your organisation is going to do stuff. And the leaders then up in the change space, you call it, they convince themselves that the organisation is enacting the strategy that they've set out, and it becomes this almost mental gymnastics of trying to confirm that everything is going as planned.
Yeah, and I think more often than not, as we know, that is not the reality of the situation. And what tends to happen is that we just get an organisation that pulls in multiple different directions at the same time. And the worst part of that is that it's probably for really good reasons. And like everyone's acting, I would imagine, quite rationally from their own perspective of where they're sitting in the bigger system. But because you're lacking that sort of lens of the what is coherence for this organization, there is nothing to anchor back to. So we're all pursuing, and I'm sure you've spoken to others about this, probably to death, but the whole local optimization side of things, because everyone's pursuing what's best for them within their tiny little environment without thinking about actually what's better for the whole. But if no one can speak to what the whole is supposed to be doing anyway, then the rational thing is probably to pursue what's best for me and my team right now.
Yeah, and I don't blame them, because one, in part, you sort of want them to do that because that's what you want them to do. It becomes, they start to fracture when there's no clarity around what it is. And when you see, and I talk about this a lot, people are going to roll their eyes when I go on about it, but when you see purpose statements, vision statements that are just a load of nonsense, no wonder people can't then think about what's the whole actually doing. When you see purpose statements like Lloyd's Banking Group, I like using, I hope they didn't try and get me done for a libel, but they say that their purpose is to make Britain prosper. But that's not what the whole is doing.
I would be very surprised.
Yeah. And so, and you've got like Thames Water, who have just been fined 100-odd million, maybe more, for sewage pollution. But their purpose statement of what they're saying they're there to do is to make communities thrive. I'm like, well, that's not what you do. That's not what you're there for. You're there to provide clean, fresh water.
Yeah. That'd be the simplified way of just getting to the core of what they're there to do.
Yeah. Obviously, there is more, but that's the point. When you get to the, I say to him, once you understand, and I use Posywid and Stafford Beer, the purpose of the system is what it does. Once you understand what it should do as the whole, then you can break down, well, what are the subsequent parts that enable us to do that? And then you can start getting into, how do we split, lump, design the organisation? But when it's just nonsense, it's hard to do that.
This is where the sort of the serve layer also comes into its own, because it is that layer that helps coordinate between the operating units. So if that's done well, so if the change work has been done well in terms of clearly articulating to sort of the serve layer in terms of what are the non-negotiables and you know, what is it that we're here to do, then you can design the serve layer in such a way that the various run units don't run off in their own directions at the expense of each other, because there is the bigger picture to sort of anchor back to. But I think it sort of sounds that I'm worried that some of the wording comes across as everything is designed into minutiae, but it really isn't. It's really about trying to do the minimum design sort of constraints that you can, and usually at the change level, that's much higher. It's like writing, drawing out the box to sort of inside this box. These are the customers, these are the market segments that we're targeting, and we want to be this type of organisation. We will accept risk up to this point, and don't spend more than X. Here you go. Those are the parameters, and then some of the constraining things that that can't be tinkered with would be enabled by the serve layer. But then run is, by all accounts, they can colour in that box in whatever colour and whatever pencil they like.
Yeah.
That they should have that freedom. So it's not about sort of getting into the weeds and trying to think that intentful design is down at the minutia, because ideally it's the other way around. You want to do as little as possible to
Yeah.
the maximum amount of freedom within the agreed constraints.
Yeah, because once you've got that, clear articulation of what the whole's trying to do and what they're trying to do. Like you said earlier, people want to do a good job, and they will do a good job. But also, a lot of I have to remind people, a lot of the constraints are already governed. So, if you work for the rail industry, there's a lot of regulations that are already there. So you don't have to go into a lot of these things. And I think that sometimes people miss that when they're thinking about the constraints of the organisation.
And I think,
yeah,
I think constraints, but constraints is probably at times a very misunderstood word. My view is that, clarity of constraints or boundaries or whatever we want to call it is very liberating, because it allows you a very good understanding of, within this space, I'm free to move. And it's my job to work out the various pathways to achieve whatever it is I'm trying to achieve. And I don't have to sort of bother anyone as long as I stay within those boundaries. It's fine. Yes, you need to have a mechanism for challenging the boundaries if needed. That's fine, but that's a different conversation than the general sort of getting on with the work that you're supposed to be doing. That way of thinking, it goes down even to the it's the same for a team, for a division, for an enterprise, or down to the role. It's just that obviously the boundaries for discretion might shift, and the resources that you've got available to you would be different as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is I always say, understand your constraints, challenge them where needed, but exploit your freedoms. And that's what,
Yes.
if exploit your freedoms, I'll be in a happy place. I've always been in a happy place when I've understood what my constraints are, and I've understood what resources I have and what people want to achieve. Once I've got that, I'm happy, because I can understand that, and I can look at what's changing, what's happening, and I can respond intelligently towards those changes, because I have that freedom, a clarity of freedom.
Yeah, and I think it's just I think we're just gonna see more and more need for that to happen, because a lot of the simpler work, which only has one sort of pathway to execution, it's been happening for a long time, but all of that stuff is getting automated because it's a very simple, if this then do that. Like there is only one path to get it done. So there's by all accounts, there's no judgment, and there's no decision making really, because there's only one path to follow. And why would you get a human to do something like that? You're not tapping into the capability of that human being by getting them to do that kind of stuff.
But that's what we end up, because I see it when people, we were talking about, you don't have to find it too narrowly or too much in detail because it's no requirement. But people do. Definitely when something goes unexpected to what they wanted, then they start they completely remove the serve layer, and they just try to manage that serve layer by adding more policies or more rules, more processes. And it means then what you've got is your run layer have got no lateral movement. They've got nothing.
No.
They just have to blindly do what's been said, even though they can see that that's not going to match the complexity or the ask that's required from the external environment.
That's right, which then becomes a requisite variety issue, in terms of you don't have the capacity to deal with the multitudes of sort of demand or requests that are being asked of you, because you've been forced into a situation where you can only respond in one or two ways to anything that comes your way. So we're stupefying the system, if you want, by not allowing that freedom. And what tends to happen in many organizations is the run, what I call an escalation grammar, when it comes to dealing with variance or disturbance, things that are out of the norm. So that anytime something like that hits, you have to go to the supervisor to to get approval to fix it. And that again just adds another layer, and it adds latency. The time taken to get an outcome for a decision increases every time. But sometimes it's the only way. It's the only way that's safe to operate, because people have seen a shot on the public square for not following that process. So it doesn't feel safe to exercise common sense, really. But it's not a safe way of operating. So, and the organisation is just baking in the confusion tax and institutionalising it.
Yeah.
And then it happens on multiple different parts of the organisation, and now we're just one confused, organism.
Yeah, and I was in an organisation end of last year, and there was an employment lawyer there, and she told all these leaders that there was no such thing as common sense. And I kind of get what she was coming at and the point, but that sort of approach, thinking, well, there is common sense, but common sense needs to be bounded by all the good things we're talking about: constraints, clarity of intent. Then they've got the right knowledge, skills, and ability because we've trained them to do that role. But I think we just assume stupidity and we build from that point, and then we make it so difficult for people to actually do the job that they'll just.
I've written about this and I've spoken about this for a very, very long time. And we tend to design systems in organizations for, the 1% that will do the wrong thing. And we're trying to protect ourselves at all costs for that anomaly to not happen. And then you go, so now you've just made life so much harder for 99% of employees who have to follow this process or this system. And you go, is it really worth it? Wouldn't it be smarter to just assume that most people will do a good job if they've got a good job to do, or they will do the right thing. And if someone does the wrong thing, just deal with it as an exception. Just don't make life harder for everyone else. We're very, very good at, own goals, so to speak, or just setting up like every obstacle we can to make it harder for people to just get on with the work. And we do it, because we think it's saving the organization something. When you go, like, surely the cost of running such high confusion or such a punitive design would be outweighed by a simpler, more straightforward way of thinking about things. And it's instilled, McGregor theory Y, theory X sort of assumption, we're designing it on the assumption that everyone's a theory X person, when in reality no such person existed, but we've created them by the way we've designed our systems of work.
Yeah. And that's the thing, when you get that odd person that does something, we don't deal with that person. We punish everybody else. Because we've set it up in that way. And I think another thing where I think distracts people a lot in design, and it comes back to that serve layer and the fact that, you mentioned it earlier, that we create these, you've got these multiple run functions or teams that are all doing jobs, and we want them to have the autonomy to do what they need to do, be self-organizing, but then we need that serve layer to ensure that we minimize the conflict. We're not fighting over resources and stuff like that. But we don't think about that. So what happens is that you get these teams and they start having these conflicts, or they make decisions that are not good for them and not best for the whole, or they fight over resources. And we automatically go to a silo problem. And we go, it's a silo problem. So then I will jump in and we'll start doing stuff like empathy mapping or working better together days. And we get them together to try and do it, when you think, no, you just have no survey, as you put it. There's no coordination. We haven't thought about how do we hand over things that need to be. We've not thought about what information or inputs does this team need, and where does it come from that enable them to do what they need to do. Where does their outputs go, and who needs it? We haven't thought about this actual design. So then, of course, it's going to appear like a silo. But if you sort those out, then there's no such thing as, well, not that there's not such a thing, but you'll minimize the idea of silos.
100%. And I mean, I think there's a concept that that I talk about around responsibility domains, which is like the first part of the model that I'm working with, which is around having really clear, good boundary design for the outcomes that you're seeking. So you try and not fragment. You really want a team, or whatever the unit is that you're sort of looking at, to be as autonomous as they possibly can in terms of achieving whatever the outcomes are. Rely as little as possible on other teams. At some points, there are some things that won't necessarily be where it's possible, but a lot of the times you can probably have one team accountable for some customer outcome where they are contained fully in that, so that from start to finish they can get the job done. Which then what I would call that's a coherent design if you have that. And then you think about, well, ideally, there's a normative statement there, but the most cost effective way of running that is to have what I call like local correction grammar, which means any variance, disturbance that happens inside that in terms of delivering on that outcome can be resolved by the people within that responsibility domain. They can just deal with it. That's just par for the course. Something weird happens, they just deal with it. And that it's seen as that whole arrangement is seen as a legitimate way of operating, which is sort of the third axis of our model that we think about, which is an important part of coherence, because a lot of the time in a fractured organizations, we see a lot of, I guess, professional injury. We see people feeling that they can't do what they think is the right thing because that will be penalized by the organization. You have, nurses who feel that they like almost breaching like nursing ethics because the organization is forcing them to do something that they go, I really don't want to be doing this, but if I don't do it, I'll get punished for it. Engineers, feeling that, there are people signing off on things that they shouldn't be signing off on because for a whole bunch of different reasons. And we see this all over. So you could have a good responsibility domain, you could have the right grammar in place, like the regulatory grammar in place. But if that arrangement is not seen as a fair, respectful way of operating, you still have a fracture because you've got a bit of a clash in terms of the moral side of the org design, which is again costly. Because that's also the stuff that burns people out and makes them feel like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I stuck in a system that operates this way?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And all this is perfect because if you have these different domains, the roles are clear, decision rights are clear, it helps them with the execution of strategy. There's always this gap that they talk about, the gap between strategy and execution. And there always is going to be a gap because we use a sense of hypothesis that we're going to test through action. And when we then hit reality, it will change in different ways. Hopefully it enacts how we expect, but we've got different actors that respond in ways that we didn't expect. It may hit some other challenges in the contextual environment, but it gets easier to manage that gap because we understand who's responsible for that. They understand who's responsible for it, and we're giving them the responsibility to see how it's landing, see the gap, and then take ownership of adapting it. So they're still meeting the intent. They're just changing how we're getting to that point, and it makes the execution a lot quicker, a lot easier to understand, and easier to implement.
So I think a lot of transformation programs, etc., get it wrong because it's very, a lot of the time it's whole of organization change like all the time, which is sort of change that coming from the top, so to speak, and it's enterprise wide all the time, when really they should probably be operating at different tempos. Whereas you set out the intent, put some boundaries in place in the SERB layer, but then the operations that are closest to reality in terms of what is actually happening in the market. How are these things landing, the changes, whatever they might be? How are they actually landing in the market? What are we learning, like right at the coalface with what's happening? And you go take that learning, and you can iterate really quickly. You can be really agile in the operational layer of the business. Again, provided that you've got clarity of what the constraints are that you're operating under. So go off, make those changes, but you're still true to what the overall intent was. So you're still coherent, even if you do A or B, it doesn't matter. But they should then have the freedom to do that. If every time they want to make a little change, like the decision making has to go all the way up to the top to get a decision, well, opportunity lost, because it's going to take 2 weeks before you get a response. So you've now lost the opportunity to do something quickly, maybe learn something really valuable and actually be agile.
Yeah. Well, really, the only times you want is if they're going to go beyond some constraint. But, apart from that, they should just be free to do what they need to do to achieve your intent. And you're right about this. So I heard someone talk about it and you go, well, one of their disqualifiers for if it's strategy or not was that if it doesn't involve the whole organization, it's not strategy. And I'm like, well, that's not true, because I could have a strategy, which is in the sense of like, and definitely when I term, why we have strategy is because our pursuit for viability and advantage. Well, we're responding to changes in the external environment, which means that actually to enact this strategy, to do that, I only need to involve that function, and that's it. The rest, I just need them to carry on doing exactly what they're doing now. So they're still involved, but they're just not changing or anything. But there seems to be this
100% agree.
Yeah. Seems to be a obsession with change, especially with change that has to involve the whole organisation. You think are you ludicrous? You're going to destabilize the whole organisation for no reason.
Yeah, and then that it translate into that it's supposed to translate somehow, cascade into every part of the organisation. So all of a sudden, you now have to, and this is where a lot of this, the theatrics come in, because you now have to massage something to fit something. You have to the finance department now have to prove or show how they're aligned to strategy. And you go, well, I'm in accounts payable. How does my work, what difference does that make to my work that we're launching a new set of products, or we're going into different markets? No difference at all. And that's not where the battle is going to be won or lost, if accounts payable is working or not, unless that's the service that you're actually providing, which, it's a very small subset of businesses.
Yeah. There's all this theatre all the time, especially because most orthodoxy is strategy. They can't just have a strategy; they have to have new values as well for some reason. I don't know why. They seem to have lumped them all in the same thing. So not only are they trying to then sort of post-rationalize, justify what they're doing to the strategy, which we know what happens. They look at it and just go, well, what am I currently doing? How can I then write it into my objectives that I'm doing that and it's aligned to the things. Also, they need to do that with values as well. Justify how you showed integrity.
Yeah, which a lot of values. Again, I think values is just that's just a red herring in its own right, because it's not about the values themselves. It's about the behaviors that we associate with that value. We can have two different groups, and we can both value honesty, but what honesty looks like to group one and what honesty looks like to group two could be widely different. But it's the same value. It's the same that you have the same values. It's like a meaning. It's just meaningless. It doesn't actually add anything to it. And I think I've seen so many times your point around, we're still doing a pet project. We know that it's not aligned to anything. It probably, if we're really hard nosed about it, it probably wouldn't be a priority at all.
Yeah.
But we've now massaged we've now massaged it well enough so it aligns to an OKR or something, and that we can show some sort of tenuous link to the strategy. So now we still get the funding, and we can go on and doing it. Very few organizations that I've seen that are really, really, really sharp on the prioritization side of things and doing we are going to say no to this because that is not the strategy that we're pursuing. So this doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So we're going to say no to that, especially if they've already started spending money on it, because then it's the whole sunk cost sort of idea. And you go, well, I might as well continue it. And you go, no, you'd be much better off taking whatever's left of that program, just cut this and put it somewhere else. But it just doesn't happen. I don't know if it's a courage thing or whatever it is, or self-preservation or whatever, but it very rarely happens in my experience.
Yeah. I've been trying to explore why this happens as well. I haven't really come to a definitive answer, but there is different parts. I've looked at this whole aversion to power and, say no. Apparently all power is bad according to coaches. And then and I think there's a lot of what you articulate in your confusion tax, because we don't actually know what the things should do. So we can't really then work out what is a pet project and what it isn't. And I think this whole idea that, strategy is everything. So everyone should be doing something towards it, even though they don't necessarily need to. That's where I think it sort of creates this lovely ground for it to grow and to cause a disease on the organisation.
Which is funny, because I would have thought strategy would be the one thing that would tell you, or should help tell you, where should we be? We've got scarce resources. Where should we put them? And strategy, in my view, ought to be the thing that provides some clarity around, we need to invest here, here, and here. That's it. They're the three. They're the three parts of the organisation that really need to run well if we're going to have any chance of being successful in achieving that. Everything else, that's you just keep doing what you're doing, and do a good job at that. But we don't need to be world-leading experts in again, I'll use accounts payable. We don't have to be world-leading experts. As long as we've got something that works and not too draining, fine. Just keep doing that. Don't invest anything in financial transformation and whatever. When did you last see like an ERP investment in finance actually provide a return on investment like that was related to strategy? I've never seen one.
Nah, no have I. And you're exactly right. And it's all down, of course, a lot I talk about is that this strategy theatre where there is no direction. It's just aspirational words that mean nothing. Yeah. So it doesn't provide that clarity.
A lot of that. There's a lot of theatrics going around: governance, agile. We you name it. We've got every framework under the sun. But what we haven't done is, one of the questions you get people to think about is like, we've done all these changes, transformations, and we've got every framework under the sun. Are decisions made any faster now than they were before? There you go. Probably not. They're probably the same as they were before, because we've done nothing to make any changes to that. We're still not clear around what role makes what decisions, under what circumstances, what's okay and what's not okay. Still don't know. But now we're agile. Now we have data stand-ups. So now we're confused. Every morning we're confused because we still don't know.
We're just playing it. Yeah. I've seen that before. With people who've done stand-up. Like, so what? Why are you doing these stand-ups? What's that giving you? And I just get like blank looks. It's just, we've been told to do them, so we just do them. I'm like, that's always a good way to go.
Yeah. And what changed? What changed as a result of the meeting that you had today? Like, what decisions did this inform? There you go. Nothing. But now we can. Now someone can tick a box and say we're doing agile because we're doing stand-ups, and everyone actually stood up. So fantastic, job done. We've got a Kanban. It was like a Scrum chart or a Scrum board or whatever, and everything has to be done following like Scrum or Lean or Six Sigma or whatever it might be, whatever flavor it is. It's rare to go, actually, what is the nature of the problem that we're trying to solve or grapple with here? And then what's the suitable method for addressing that? I can't do that because it has to be the corporate prescribed method for problem solving. So it has to fit the template, because otherwise the PMO don't know what to do with it. And you go, confusion and just wasted effort.
Yeah.
Galore.
I totally agree. We have fun all day. Like you could just pull it all apart. And I've noticed a lot of agile people now, because agile is sort of dying off. They're just sort of permeating into the strategy world, which I don't think is probably the best. But loved having you on. Before you go, what would you like to leave listeners to think about from this episode?
What do we think about? Probably something around where you are paying the confusion tax. You got to think about there's so many different roles in the organization that are carrying structural loads that they shouldn't be carrying. They're the glue people that they're the ones that navigate the complexities of the organization, and they're really valuable because it is so fractured. So you need someone that can do this, but they're doing it at a very high cost to themselves, and it's a very high risk as well, because they leave. That's when you're going to find where the holes are in the organization. But unfortunately, someone else is probably going to come and plug them, because people do want to do a good job. They don't want to see customers not getting what they want and what they need, etc. So I think there's probably something there around the confusion tax and decision latency. Like, how long does it take to get a decision done? Like the simple test of how many layers of the organization does a decision have to go to actually get to an outcome? All of that stuff they're just signals of a confusion tax that you're paying.
I think that's great. And for people who want to look at org design in a more thoughtful way, beyond just boxes, and that's what I keep seeing all the time. We've done an org change, we just moved boxes. Actually thinking about the architecture behind it, the decision rights, the flows, all that good stuff. That I thank you for so much for coming along today. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
This is these types of conversations where I wish I could get away with what Joe Rogan does, and we go for like 3 hours, because I think we could do that.
We could probably talk for 3 hours. That's for sure. I can talk for Australia on this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. I've loved it. And for the listeners, if you loved it, please subscribe, share it, so that other people can get value from this conversation and from Stefan's work. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. But Stefan, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me.
No worries. Thank you.